that was a very interesting story. And our next reader is somebody, Stacy has already been here a while ago, but she's got something new to read to us. She's a writer and academic. Stacy Patton, excuse me, is a writer, an academic, and a child advocate. She attended Johns Hopkins University and New York University, where she earned a degree in journalism. She received her PhD in American history from Rutgers University. Patton has also written for the New York Times, Washington Post, Baltimore Sun, New York Newsday, and is a current contributor to the Crisis magazine and the Women's Review of Books. She is currently a reporter for the Chronicle of Higher Education. In 2007, Patton published her first book, That Mean Old Yesterday, a memoir about her childhood experiences growing up in New Jersey's foster care system and her journey to boarding school. Her memoir also discusses the historical roots and impact of physical discipline of children in African American families. So thank you very much, and you'll be able to also buy her book during our 15-minute break.
I hope y'all don't mind the hat, gloves, and scarf, but it's cold in here. I feel like we're in the middle of a hurricane or something. 2 weeks ago, I think it was, I was in Brooklyn at the public library on a panel with Todd Gitlin, who I'm sure many of you know that name, and it was a two-person panel. And Todd Gitlin was a former professor of mine at NYU, and so we were both asked to come to talk about Occupy Wall Street. And so, but many months before that, about around Thanksgiving, I was asked to write a piece for the Washington Post about Occupy Wall Street, and I was tasked with answering the question about why there seemed to be limited engagement in the Occupy protests amongst African Americans. But even before that, I started thinking about this question. I had a conversation with one of my good white guy friends in Brooklyn, and it was the night that the protesters took to the Brooklyn Bridge, and there was that sort of mass arrest. And he said, he called me up and he said, "Stace, you know, where are your people? Why aren't you black folks out there, you know, on the bridge? You guys, you know, taught everybody how to protest during the civil rights movement. So where are they? Why aren't they out there?" And I said to him, "Because the NYPD does not like black people, and they will shoot them off the bridge." And so he thought I was exaggerating. But I started really giving some thought to this question, and so I wrote this piece in the Washington Post just around Thanksgiving, and it ticked off a lot of folks, and I got called some names, socialist idiot, you know, things like that. And but despite that, here's a piece, and I've sort of blended in an extended version of this, my comments that I shared with Todd Gitlin and the folks at the Brooklyn Public Library. So the piece was called "Why Blacks Aren't Embracing Occupy Wall Street." Occupy Wall Street might seem like a moment that would resonate with black Americans. After all, unemployment among African Americans is at 15% versus almost 8% for whites. And between 2005 and 2009, black households lost just over half of their median net worth compared with white families who lost 16%, according to the Pew Research Center. However, these numbers have not translated into action. A few prominent African Americans, such as Cornel West, Russell Simmons, Kanye West, and Representative John Lewis, have made appearances at Occupy protests. Occupy the Hood, a recent offshoot, has tried to get more people of color involved, but the main movement remains overwhelmingly white. A Fast Company survey, well, this was back in October, found that African Americans, who are 12.6% of the U.S. population, make up only 1.6% of Occupy Wall Street. African Americans share white Americans' anger about corporate greed and corruption, and blacks have a rich history of protesting injustice in the United States. So why aren't they occupying? Quote, "Occupy Wall Street was started by whites and is about their concern with their plight, end quote. Natalie Thandenway, a radio host and producer for WBAI in New York, said in an interview. Now that capitalism isn't working for everybody, some are protesting, she said. From America's birthing pains to the civil rights protests of the 1960s, blacks have never been afraid to fight for economic or social justice. Crispus Attucks, a former slave and the first person killed by British soldiers in the Boston Massacre of 1770, is considered the first martyr of the American Revolution. Frederick Douglass, a slave-turned-abolitionist, stressed in the 19th century that black and white laborers' fortunes and freedoms were intertwined, saying that white labor was robbed of fair wages so long as it competed with unpaid black slaves. In 1969, James Forman, former executive secretary of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, otherwise known as SNCC, a civil rights organization, called on blacks to not perpetuate capitalism or contribute to the exploitation of blacks in the United States and elsewhere. He urged black workers to take over America by sabotaging factories and ports while the brothers fight guerrilla warfare in the street. And Huey Newton in the Black Panther Party renounced the American dream as defective and called for the destruction of the capitalist system. Blacks have historically suffered the income inequality and job scarcity that the Wall Street protesters are now railing against. Perhaps black America's absence is sending a message to the occupiers. We told you so. Nothing will change. We've already been here. It's hopeless. While the black press and civil rights groups such as the NAACP and the National Urban League were critical to past protest movements, black churches were the organizational force behind the rhetoric. Church leaders mobilized famous names and unsung heroes to end segregation through meetings, marches, demonstrations, boycotts, and sit-ins. But where is the black church now? Some argue that the black church is losing its relevance, especially among young people who have been turned off by the religious theater of celebrity preachers. Even after lenders were accused of targeting black churches and communities as fertile markets for subprime mortgages, these churches are not joining Occupy protests en masse. And despite their inclusive mission statements, major civil rights organizations and leaders appear to be selling out black America for corporate money. Beginning in the 1980s, for example, the tobacco and alcohol industries meticulously cultivated relationships with leaders of black communities. Institutions such as the NAACP, the United Negro College Fund, and the Congressional Black Caucus have counted those industries as major donors at the expense of the health of the black community. More recently, the Congressional Black Caucus and other civil rights groups have received strong financial backing from telecommunications companies such as AT&T and Comcast. These firms support regulations that would be barriers to the goal of universal internet access, stifling economic opportunity for black communities. We can't expect our civil rights organizations and political leaders to help blacks rage against the corporate machine when they are part of it. And what about Jay-Z and other hip-hop stars? For all their influence on American culture, they haven't tackled big challenges such as poverty, police brutality, voting disenfranchisement, and the racist prison complex. Jay-Z hasn't shown up at any Occupy gatherings, but his clothing company appears to be trying to capitalize on the protest wave. Rocawear is peddling Occupy the All Streets t-shirts for $22 a pop with no plans to donate profits to the movement. Beyond a lack of leaders to inspire them to join the Occupy fold, blacks are not seeing anything new for themselves in the movement. Why should they ally with whites who are just now experiencing the hardships that blacks have known for generations? Perhaps white Americans are now paying the psychic price for not answering the basic questions that blacks have long raised about income inequality. New Jersey comedian John Alter Negro Minus, that's his name, says he won't participate in the Occupy protest because black people are being besieged by so many injustices he can't get behind targeting just the 1%. Banks' bad behavior just gets lost in the sauce, so to speak, Minus said. High joblessness and social disenfranchisement is new to most of the Wall Street protesters. It's been a fact of life for African Americans since the beginning. I actually think that black people are better served by staying out of the protests. Civil disobedience will only further the public perception that black people like to cause trouble, he said. Is there a chance that the movement can become more diverse? Leslie Wilson, a professor of African American history at Montclair State University, is not optimistic. Occupy Wall Street cannot produce enough change to encourage certain types of black participation, Wilson said in an interview. The church cannot get enough blacks out on the street. Some students will go, but not the masses. Black folks, particularly older ones, do not think that this is going to lead to change. This generation has already been beaten down and is hurting. They are not willing to risk what little they have for change. Those who are wealthier are not willing to risk and lose, he said. Black America's fight for income inequality is not on Wall Street, but it is a matter of day-to-day survival. The more pressing battles are against tenant evictions, police brutality, and street crime. This group doesn't see a reason to join the amorphous occupiers. But if the Occupy movement does not grow in solidarity with other constituencies of exploited and oppressed people, and if Black America does not devise new leadership strategies to deal with today's problems, the truth of Frederick Douglass's wisdom will hold, that the powerful undertow of race and class in America will keep both blacks and whites from being free. So a few months later, I added these thoughts after seeing, following the developments since September. The takeaway from my Washington Post article is that the realization that the Occupy Wall Street is not a social justice movement. What it is a predominantly white, class-driven response to disillusionment caused by the economic collapse. Blacks, Latinos, and Native Americans aren't visibly involved in mass in Occupy Wall Street because we're not disillusioned. We have never had the luxury of being illusioned when it comes to race, class, and money in America. Sure, we've bought into the American dream. We've been part of the overall economic system, but never from an advantaged or empowered position. What these mass protests are really about is an economic reality check. The illusion that has undergirded our entire consumer-based, credit-heavy economic culture has been stripped away. Occupy Wall Street is fueled by that disillusioned rage of the entitled and those who may never have actually been entitled, but who believe that, thanks to their race, they were just a lucky breakaway from joining the ranks of the privileged and the powerful. Most people of color do not build their lives on that illusion. Recent generations of our ancestors aspired to join the middle class, to swim in the mainstream and have a steady job, own a home, and hopefully begin to benefit from the system in proportion to the contributions our people have made to build and strengthen that system. Despite its narrow focus and appeal, Occupy Wall Street represents an important shift in the mainstream consciousness. In just a few months, it has taken root as a symbol of individuals coming together to flex their collective power. Can you imagine what kind of real change could happen if Occupy Wall Street did grow into a social justice movement, and what kind of mountains could be moved, what kind of progressive history could be made? The potential is there to turn mass disillusionment into forward movement. Occupy Wall Street still has great momentum, and it may well be a factor in this presidential election year. But what will be the end result, the enduring legacy of Occupy Wall Street? To be successful in bringing about real change, it must build coalitions with other movements, including Occupy the Hood, but particularly with efforts to change our nation's prison industrial complex. More African American men are in prison or jail, on probation or paroled, or on parole than were enslaved in 1850 before the Civil War began, according to Michelle Alexander, an Ohio State law professor and author of the book, The New Jim Crow. Occupy Wall Street could join forces with organizations working for women's reproductive rights, an issue brought into dramatic focus with the Susan G. Komen Foundation's controversial flip-flop on funding breast cancer screenings at Planned Parenthood sites. It would seem a natural fit for them to join forces with the environmental justice movement. And wouldn't it be powerful if Occupy Wall Street applied some of their influence to addressing our nation's shameful and growing academic achievement gap between children of color and their white and Asian peers? They could, but will they? While it's not expressly defined to exclude anyone, it seems clear that Occupy Wall Street is, by its very nature, its demographic majority, more attuned to the just us form of justice than anything that challenges and attacks our nation's systemic injustice based on race and class. The Civil Rights Movement, America's most defining social justice movement, was dedicated to a single, well-defined cause: ending legal racial segregation in America. None of today's Occupy movements are that clearly defined or demographically focused. Is that a strength, or will it prove to be a weakness? Will either of the Occupy movements focus on registering and educating voters to exercise their voting power in November? Will they work to fight the challenges to voting rights designed to tip the scales toward the conservative candidate? Does it even make sense for their focus to remain on the protesting the suddenly unfair culture of Wall Street with no clear plan for challenging or replacing it with something more just and equitable? Looking ahead to the presidential election and beyond, what would you like to see as the enduring legacy of the Occupy movement? To what kind of change would you make a commitment, raise your voice, and take a stand? What do you feel strongly enough about to brave the possibility of tear gas, tasers, police brutality, and arrest? These are questions I believe we should all be pondering in this age of the Occupy movement, in this era where the people now drive the media instead of the other way around, and where we enjoy a speed and breadth of communications options unimaginable even a few years ago. While the world's eyes remain fixed on Occupy Wall Street, we will all continue to filter what we see through our own specific realities, experiences, and demographically driven views. What is the potential for this movement to bring different groups together? What kind of possibility does Occupy the Hood offer for progress and positive change? I believe the potential and possibility for change do exist in the seeds of the Occupy movement. But if history is any indication, it will take something even more widely devastating than our current economic collapse to inspire people who regard each other as them to join forces in a way that truly moves our nation forward. The old saying that the people united can never be defeated rings true. The issue is what it might take for the people, all of the people, to become united in a way that has never happened before in this country. That would be power. That would be change. That would make history and not just headlines. Thus far, that is not what Occupy Wall Street is about. The title says it all. America is ready for progress and ripe for change. What will be the fruit of these endeavors? What history will be written by the movement that began in Liberty Square and may impact our next presidential election? The answers lie in our ability to honestly discuss, debate, and confront race, class, and economic inequality as they affect millions of Americans of all races, with the poor and those of color hit hardest. Our experiences provide important answers to some of those questions posed by Occupy Wall Street. Thus far, our reality, if it's been seen at all, is relegated to the periphery, a fact brought painfully home when civil rights icon Congressman John Lewis was banned from speaking at Occupy Atlanta. Once again, race trumps all. And until this is the case, all the occupying in the world isn't going to lead to any true revelations, substantial progress, or lasting change. Thank you.